In 2023, people said AI would change everything. In 2024, they said it would change markets. In 2025, it started changing portfolios. That's usually when things get dangerous. Not because the technology is fake, but because certainty starts arriving before understanding. When a trade becomes obvious, it stops feeling uncomfortable. When everyone agrees, doubt feels unnecessary. No one likes to admit this, but most investors didn't discover AI early. They noticed it when it became unavoidable. That's the moment stories turn into positions. And positions turn into pressure. Because once something feels inevitable, not owning it starts to feel irresponsible. And that raises a question Wall Street avoids. By the time something feels this inevitable, how much freedom is there left to think independently? Belief in AI didn't appear out of nowhere. This isn't a story built on hype alone. The companies driving AI already exist. They sell products people use every day. They generate revenue businesses already depend on. AI isn't being introduced as a separate idea. It's being embedded into systems that are already paid for, renewed and scaled. That's why adoption started early and why it's difficult to reverse. This also makes AI different from past bubbles. Valuations didn't come first hoping revenue would catch up later. Revenue arrived early, so did distribution. But AI isn't a single product you download or switch on. It's a layer that runs through existing systems, software, finance, healthcare, logistics, media. And layers don't replace systems overnight. They have to fit inside legacy software security rules, compliance frameworks, and organizations where mistakes carry real cost. In some areas, integration moves fast. In others, progress slows as soon as it meets real constraints. Messy data, operational risk, human workflows that weren't built for automation. This doesn't stop adoption. It shapes it. Progress doesn't arrive all at once. It spreads where incentives are clear and hesitates where friction is hardest to remove. That's why AI adoption feels obvious in theory, but uneven in practice. Not because the technology lacks capability, but because implementation takes time. Over time, those frictions get worked through. They usually do. Just not on a single schedule, and rarely as smoothly as the narrative suggests. So when people say they believe in AI, they're not imagining things. The technology is real. The momentum is real. The question isn't whether AI matters. It's what happens when something real becomes widely accepted. When belief turns into certainty, markets stop waiting for confirmation. At some point, prices stop following reality. They start leading it. At some point, prices stop following reality. They start leading it. That's what happens when a story feels inevitable. Markets don't wait for proof at every step. When a technology looks transformative, investors project forward. They pull future progress into today's prices. Adoption that isn't complete yet gets treated as guaranteed. Margins that are still forming get treated as stable. Risks don't disappear, they just stop being priced. Individually, those assumptions make sense. Together they lock in a narrow version of the future. Progress is no longer judged on whether it continues, but on whether it arrives on schedule. Not whether things improve, but whether they improve fast enough. That's when timing starts to matter more than direction. Once expectations are set, this high, markets don't need bad news to stall. They only need reality to move more slowly than prices already assumed. And this is where the shift usually begins. Not because the technology fails, not because the numbers collapse, but because pressure builds. When prices move ahead of reality, the risk doesn't stay inside the trade. It moves into decisions, into patience, into how long people are willing to wait before waiting starts to feel uncomfortable. At this point, the problem isn't AI, it's us. Humans are bad at waiting, bad at being early, and terrible at being left out. We don't just track returns, we track other people. Who bought, who didn't, who looks smart right now. Markets turn that instinct into pressure. When prices rise, hesitation starts to feel costly. Not financially at first, socially. When everyone agrees, doubt doesn't feel neutral. It feels embarrassing, so fear adapts. It stops looking like panic. It stops sounding emotional. It puts on a suit. It starts using serious language, long-term vision, strategic positioning, structural shifts. I believe in the trend. I'm thinking 10 years out. I don't want to miss this cycle. Same emotion, different words. This is how FOMO survives in rational spaces. It doesn't announce itself. It blends in. No one wants to be the skeptic when charts keep going up. No one wants to explain patience while everyone else explains gains. So investors don't just buy exposure. They buy relief. Relief from being different. Relief from being early and alone. Relief from watching others move first. And the more crowded a trade becomes, the harder it is to tell where confidence ends and comfort begins. Because eventually, not owning the trade feels riskier than owning it. This is where things usually break. Not because the technology stops working, not because the story suddenly collapses, but because expectations stop leaving room for error. By this point, success is no longer optional. It's required. Growth isn't enough. Improvement isn't enough. Progress isn't enough. The market wants outcomes that match what prices already assumed. Earnings can grow, revenue can beat estimates, guidance can improve, and the stock can still fall. Because the market wasn't waiting for good news. It was waiting for confirmation that the future had arrived on schedule. Any delay feels suspicious, any hiccup feels structural, any slowdown feels permanent. This is how crowded trades unwind, not all at once, not through panic, not through headlines screaming collapse, but through disappointment. Valuations compress quietly. Narratives soften. Confidence fades without drama. The charts don't crash, they stall, they drift, they give back time. And the people most exposed are rarely the ones who believed first. They're the ones who arrived later, when the story felt safest, when uncertainty felt resolved. This is the hidden cost of FOMO. You don't just overpay, you inherit expectations you didn't help create. Expectations that were set when optimism was cheap and caution felt unnecessary. And when those expectations reset, the adjustment doesn't feel technical. It feels personal. There's a phase most narratives skip. Not the rise, not the collapse, but the stretch in between. When belief is still intact, but comfort quietly disappears. Nothing fundamental has changed. The thesis still makes sense. The long-term story still holds. Yet the experience shifts. Every update carries more weight. Every delay feels louder than it should. Silence starts to feel uneasy. This is when conviction turns into vigilance, not because the idea failed, but because expectations stopped allowing time to work quietly. No crisis is required, no dramatic turning point, just time passing without the confirmation prices already implied. That's when pressure moves inward, into patience, into attention, into how often people check, compare, and second guess. This is the cost few people price in. Not the cost of being wrong, but the cost of waiting inside a trade that no longer leaves room to wait calmly. And once you feel that shift, the question begins to change. Not whether the future still makes sense, but whether you're willing to live with the tension that future now demands. So what does all of this actually mean? It means more than one thing can be true at the same time. AI can reshape the economy. It can change how work is done, how decisions are made, how value is created. And AI-related investments can still be poorly timed. Understanding a long-term trend is not the same thing as acting on it at the right moment. Markets don't reward insight by itself. They reward discipline. They don't punish being early. They punish being impatient. Progress unfolds slowly. Markets react quickly. Sometimes faster than reality can keep up. That gap between how the world actually changes and how prices move ahead of it is where most mistakes are made. The hard part isn't seeing the future. Plenty of people can do that. The hard part is doing nothing when doing nothing feels wrong. When the story is everywhere, when the consensus feels settled, when waiting starts to look like hesitation instead of restraint. Because in investing, timing isn't about speed. It's about knowing when a good idea doesn't need to become a position yet. In the end, the question was never whether AI would matter. It was whether investors could tell the difference between believing in the future and needing to act on it immediately. That difference is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dramatic. But over time, it separates conviction from momentum. So here's the uncomfortable part. If nothing changed tomorrow, no headlines, no price moves, no one talking about it, would this still feel necessary?